Hello, my name is Amanda Carre, and I am the current chair of the CEU Review Committee. I would like to take a couple minutes of your time to discuss how to create valid learning objectives for your presentation. I would be remiss in giving a presentation on objectives and not starting with objectives of my own. So after this presentation, participants will be able to apply knowledge learned during this presentation to their own educational sessions. Participants will be able to construct valid learning objectives for their own educational sessions, and participants will be able to identify a valid objective compared to a poor objective. First, we have to know what a learning objective is. If we break down the words, learning has to do with the acquiring or obtaining of new skills. Objective is a direction or aim for the learning process. Therefore, a learning objective can be described as a direction for an attendee to learn new skills or materials. In other words, it is a way to describe to the learners exactly what skills that they assess for the attendee by creating a level of accountability for attendee performance. How well did the attendees retain the new information? Can they achieve a passing score on a quiz centered around the material? So we will delve into how to write a strong learning objective, but let's get a few other points out of the way first. How many objectives should you be writing? You want at least one learning objective for every 30 minutes in your session. So if your lecture is 30 minutes long, you want one objective. For 60 minutes, you need at least 2 objectives, and so on. When you're doing a panel discussion or an extended lecture where the material will be reviewed for 120 minutes, you will need at least 4 objectives with a minimum of 1 learning objective per speaker if you have multiple speakers involved. Your material may lend itself to more than 1 objective per 30-minute time slot, and it's definitely okay to have more objectives than are required per the time period. How do you inform your attendees of the objectives? Well, this is quite easy. You should be informing learners of the objectives before the session as well as during the session. So, for example, you can include an introductory slide with your objectives listed at the beginning of your talk. You can then reintroduce your objectives as you change topics in your talk, and you can also reintroduce your objectives as you switch speakers. So now that we have a couple of the basics ironed out, how do we create a learning objective? An objective should be clear, concise, and measurable. It should be focused on the goals of the overall program or the session for which you are presenting. A couple of questions to ask yourself include, what are you trying to teach your attendees? And what are your main points in your lecture or presentation? So remember, a learning objective is a specific statement of observable behaviors that can be evaluated. One of the ways we can make sure a learning objective can be evaluated is through using a measurable verb. This allows us to demonstrate critical thinking of our attendees. There's an idea levels of actions which can be observed in an individual. These actions show cognitive activity in the brain, which means that thinking is occurring in the individual. And by using a measurable verb in your objective, you are informing the attendee what thinking they must do to demonstrate learning and understanding of the topic at hand. To accurately measure this level of thinking, you want to use only one measurable verb per objective. So after a systematic review for measurable verbs by the CEU chair and vice chairs in 2015 and 16, we have decided to accept the following verbs as measurable verbs for learning objectives. Bloom's taxonomy of measurable verbs was first created in the 1950s, and it has since been revised. It has been created to show how critical thinking increases as you move down the columns from simply being able to remember a topic to being able to create your own. This list can be referenced in the Category 1 CEU application or by simply going to the NSGC page listed on the slide. Just as much as you want to use a measurable verb, you want to stay away from non-measurable verbs. These verbs are vague and unclear, and one cannot measure how well an attendee has retained the information learned during the session with these verbs. For example, how can we accurately measure if someone understands a topic? This is too vague. Also, how can we know if someone is truly aware of a topic? Again, this is unclear. So let's end our discussion by going through a couple of examples of learning objectives. Our first poor objective is, participants will be able to understand how the amniocentesis is performed. Now let's look at the revised version. Participants will be able to summarize how the amniocentesis is performed. The word understand is not a measurable verb. However, the intent of the lecturer was to have the attendees be able to summarize the amniocentesis procedure. To summarize is a measurable activity. With our second objective set, our poor objective is, Summarize the information required and design a chart note for new cancer patients for their initial visits in the Cancer Risk Evaluation Program. Our revised version is better. Design a chart note for new cancer patients for their initial visits in the Cancer Risk Evaluation Program. Summarize and design are two different verbs. We want our learning objectives to only include one measurable verb. You can either split the objective into two objectives and use summarize the information required for a chart note in your first objective and then design the chart note in your second objective, or you can use our revised version. If one can design a chart note, then it can be assumed one would be able to summarize the process of required information prior to applying it in the chart note design. I hope that this helps in identifying ways to construct valid objectives for your presentation. Please feel free to use the resources on the NSGC's website and to use verbs directly from the list provided in the Category 1 CEU application when writing your learning objectives. Thank you.